Hello everyone, I want to tell you about traveling in cold weather. In this video you can see the seems like a mist or a vapor coming up from the dogs. It was about 60, 65 below while I was traveling that day. Um, and you can hear the noise. I'll let you hear some of the noise just before I muffle it out. And that's what it sounds like. Extremely loud. The grinding, the sound of the dry snow against the runners. I mean, it's just almost deafening. And so you really, if you need to give the dogs commands, you have to kind of holler at them so they can hear you. But this was taken many years ago, and what I was doing, when I come to a steep mountain pass, I drop half the load and then go over the pass. I usually camp on the other side. Then the following day, I go back and get the rest of the load. And this is what I was doing this particular day. And as I was traveling along, I think I left camp at 55 below, and then I could hit these low areas that would really seem to chill down a little bit, kind of chilly. And then you can see the vapor from the dog's breath. And I knew, it's probably 65 below in a lot of these low areas. Well, this takes me to a story of long ago, when Alaska was still kind of a frontier, and uh, and not too many people had running water, electricity, and we all lived in little tiny log cabins. And I used to hunt quite a bit, and I would decide to get out, do some hunting for caribou, to put food on the table for my wife and child. And so I was off for, I don't know how long, maybe a week or so. And, and I was coming back and going over the hills and kind of snowshoeing along. And I felt kind of chilly. I wasn't sure, I didn't have a thermometer or anything like that. I mean, that's all. And I wasn't very modernized, just so to speak, I guess. And it's a good idea when you camp in the Arctic or in the North Country is to camp on top of a hill, because the low areas, that's where the all cold air flows, kind of like cold water flow down to the lowest spots. And so I was kind of snowshoeing along, and I noticed the mist and the vapor rising from the dog's breast, like you see in this video, but it was thicker. It was really thick. I had a small team back then. And when I looked at my lead dogs, which was only 20 or 30, 40 feet away, I could see their smiling faces, but I couldn't see the other dogs because the mist was so thick. And so towards the evening, I climbed a really high hill, and there was some nice firewood on top. So I said, well, we're going to camp here and kind of thaw out a little bit. And I looked back where we had traveled, and the low area was probably 3 or 4 miles across. And there was just a it looked the strangest sight. I've never seen anything like it, and I never have seen anything like it since. It's like a smoke trail. It's like we left a smoke trail. It wound and went over around trees and across ponds and just hung there. It was the strangest thing. It was like a 4 mile long snake made of smoke. And it was really interesting. I've never seen anything like it. I noticed the sounds were louder. The snow, when you walked on the snow with my mucklucks, which leathered sole mucklucks, I noticed the sound was extremely loud, kind of like what you hear in this video. And I said, well, must be cooling off a little bit. So I made camp, and now a lot of when you make camp in the North Country, I know we're all used to seeing Jack London little campfire guy, people sitting around in small campfires, that's not the way you do it. When you make camp in the North Country, you know, back in those days, I didn't have the technology of headlamps. And we had headlamps, but they didn't last long and the batteries froze. It's nothing like nowadays. So you needed the light. So the first thing I did when I made camp is I would chop down some trees, green trees, 3 or 4 inches through, 6 inches through, and chop them up in 8 foot lengths and lay them down, kind of create a little bed. Then on top of that, I would take dry trees, chop them down, and I would cut all the dry trees in 8 foot lengths and build a fire. So my fire would be 8 feet long, about 3 feet wide. And that way I could light up the entire area to gather more firewood, plus take care of the dogs, set up the camp. And in those days, even the camping situations were different. I used what they call a lean-to. It was just a heavy piece of canvas you strung between two trees, and it set at an angle and it faced the fire. So the heat from the fire would go into this little space, and you could really warm up. I mean, you could dry your socks, you could, sit there comfortably. But the problem is although your front would be warm, your back would be cold. Well, that's just the way it is. You just kind of turn over. Sometimes you face the fire, sometimes you let your back face the fire. That's just the way life was back then. And so I made camp and cooked up some nice big moose steaks and coffee and fed the dogs. And it was a nice camp. Now, normally in a camp like that, on a cold evening, you would put the fire out and take a little shovel and move all the ashes away from the where the fire was and all the hot coals. And then there you would have a nice long, 8 foot long trench that was warm to put your canvas down and your sleeping bag. And it was kind of like a heated bed. But this particular evening, I was getting modernized. And I had a little tent inside my sled, so I set that up. It wasn't a heated tent, it was just a nylon tent, just enough to keep the frost off your eyelids when you're sleeping. And so I got some sleep that night, and it was easy breaking camp in the morning. There were still some coals going in the fire because the green logs, they kind of keep it from sinking in the ground and going out. And so I just made a fire, cooked up some moose meat, coffee, and fed the dogs, and hitched up and lashed on my snowshoes and started across country. I noticed it was kind of chilly again. Felt like it was a little bit chillier than the day previous. And so I trucked along, and you know how the frost accumulates on your entire face and your beard. I'm sure I looked like an iceman. Finally made it to the little village called Wiseman, where my wife and child was waiting for me. I was gone for about a week or so. And they came, I walked in the door and they gasped at my at the, at the look of my face. It was covered with ice. And they said, "Oh, we thought you were dead." They were kind of really, my wife was very excited. And I said, "Well, why would you think that?" She says, "Well, the neighbors say you can't be outside in this weather and you freeze your lungs." I said, "I've never heard of such a thing." I've been running in front of those dogs and snowshoeing and huffing and puffing. I think my lungs are still here. I feel like I'm breathing. I guess that's just old false belief. So this was back, like I said, in the old days, and I haven't seen weather like that since. And it was so. She told me anyhow. My wife told me that it was 82 below in Coldfoot, and it was probably that, maybe even colder in some of the lower valleys I was in because of the thick mist that was coming out of the dog's breath were just amazing to see. And I hope you enjoyed this little story of how it was back in the old days. Um, Thanks for listening, and God bless you all.